experiencing architecture or the experience within any building or any space is an intangible thing. As let's say, I'm not talking about from the architect's point of view. I'm talking about from anyone visiting a space. You can't always put a finger on what you feel when you're going through a certain space, right? It's about the mood, it's about the materials, and it's how you design the space that gives that mood to the person walking through it. Do you deliberately try to imbue certain qualities into your architecture? Is it something that you like to go for?
Yeah, sure. You have to have goals to know how to design, right?
So how do you realize those goals from an intangible thing to a physical object?
Well, that's where we try to bring to fruition, in a way, our experiences as physical beings, right? And our experiences as professionals with knowledge about the rules of the art, if you can call it like that.
Yeah.
And you combine that, the rules of the art or theory or things you would have learned formally, with the things you learn informally by just being a perceptive human using space.
Yeah.
And we all have that, right? If you go to a restaurant, you will know in a fraction of a second which table you ideally would like to sit on.
Yeah.
In that given space.
Very instinctive.
It's very instinctive and has something to do with our bodies and the way we behave in public when others are around. Yeah. And that's, I'm sure there's some sort of primordial instincts play into that.
Yeah.
But I do think that the architecture happens when you combine it.
Yes, exactly.
Combine that part with the learned part of of proportion, of art, of history of art, history of architecture, archaeology, engineering, and all of that plays into it. And so I think that gives you somewhat like a toolbox where you know that if the emotions or the reactions you would like to favor, I don't think you can provoke them for sure. Yeah. You can't be sure about it, but you could favor certain reactions in the user. Then you know that you have to do it this way or that way.
Right.
Right. The height or the space, the amount of space, the proportion of how much is left next to my shoulder when I pass through a passage.
Yes.
It's all. It all is very mundane. It's all inches and centimeters, and this material, that material doesn't sound very poetic.
Yeah.
But when it's all put together, it better be.
And that's the same for photographing architecture as well. So when I teach workshops, it's a lot about looking at what time of year it is, so you know exactly where the sun is going to be and how long are the shadows going to be, what's the color of the sunlight going to be at that point of time. And also, like when you stand in a certain place, how much of your field is going to be in focus. There's so many things. It's sort of is like, it's sometimes like watching these behind the scenes clips of how movies are made with great special effects. You suddenly see there is a process to it, and well, that it sort of takes the magic out, but the magic is actually that process in itself.
I think it's a very good analogy. The movies, I often think about it a little bit like a soundtrack in a movie, in fact.
Yeah.
Right? The architecture we experience most of the time really is background, isn't it?
Yeah.
You may be good at your job, you may have a family problem, you may have a family celebration, whatever it is, and the architecture melts in the background, but it's there.
Yeah.
And it influences just in small ways what's happening.
Yeah.
And then now and then it kind of jumps into the foreground a little bit when you start noticing it or does something good to you, just like you may recognize a song in a movie, or so the soundtrack, which is noises and a soundscape really.
Yeah.
But a soundtrack also is music and composition, so it's a little bit like that. And I enjoy that, to be able to say, no, we are going to stay in the background here. For this project, we're not going to bring out the big fireworks. We are going to riff on the vernacular, or that way we're going to stay in the background and let life have its space. And sometimes you need to bring it all out, the fireworks. I'm sure that's a similar thing for you. Sometimes you go after a big shot.
I never thought of it as music, but when you so I listen to a lot of podcasts, and a lot of these conversational style of podcasts, like what we're doing now, they have a very soft, neutral music playing in the background. And what's interesting is I've noticed that they use the soft, neutral music when the guest is talking about something that's really happy. And they use the same soft, neutral music when they're talking about a very somber time in their lives. Or they use the same thing when they're talking about how their business just crashed and burned, right? But because it's so neutral, it sort of takes on the flavor of the conversation, and the music suddenly, the same neutral music, becomes somber, becomes cheerful, becomes inspirational. And I think that's, so when you talk about architecture being like the soundtrack, it's like, whether you're going through happy times or sad times, or jubilant times, great success or failure, you're probably going to be living in the same house, and the house takes on whatever your mood is, right? It's almost like that's almost tangible when you walk into a room that's happy or sad. You feel it. And I think that also has a lot to do with the quality of light within the space. So, do you? What is your approach to quality of light? Because the reason at the beginning of the interview I asked you about, what kind of a place was where you grew up, because the quality of light, natural light there, is really different from how it is here. How do you try and bring in that? Because I've noticed that in the interiors of your buildings, there is a very soft white quality of light, which is quite different from a lot of places that you go to, right? Larger, more horizontal windows, longer windows where there's more light coming in, but it seems a bit more diffused. Obviously, that is intentional. So what's your approach to lighting a space?
It's interesting what you say. I'm not sure if it comes from, but maybe it does come from the, your experience of different light conditions in different parts of the world. I often think that, at least here in South India or many parts in India, we often have too much light. And if you move the window out and let it receive direct sunlight, and it's a big window because you may want views or whatever it is, you just generate such a high contrast between your internal surfaces and the bright window that everything burns out. And I often feel one wants to get a little depth to the opening so that the transition is not as contrasted, not as stark, not as harsh on the eye. And so, how do you shade it? The landscape plays a huge role. A tree can do that job nicely placed. And so it is important to us. I think it's one of the big prime concerns we have is the light, natural and artificial. So pretty much like in your field, the light really, a project well lit is, and of mediocre quality itself, is still better than a great project badly lit. So
what I really like to, so there are times when I'll get to see buildings when they're under construction. So they don't have the window frames, they don't have the blinds, they don't have curtains, they don't have anything inside them. And I find the quality of light there sometimes is better than when everything is in place. When you have no obstruction and no filtration of the light coming in. I mean, that's what...
It's complex, huge topic. And it's fascinating. Sometimes there are lighting designers involved, which is also very interesting because they have a complete different take on it. It's mostly more technology driven, and that's interesting too. But even the basic architectural moves of, shading devices, fabrics, I think, are often undervalued in that context. For us, often the fabric has more structural, really, qualities than decorative.
In what way?
In the way that it does change the light so fundamentally. So when we look at a fabric, it's not about its decorative qualities, its pattern or color in the first place, but how will it change the room altogether by virtue of filtering the light. And so the weave and the thickness and becomes a lot more important.
Yeah. When I look at a movie, I think of it as shots and lighting as well, which is obviously related to what I do. It's very interesting to. I'm quite interested to know what's that like to watch a movie where there is, let's say, a home or an office, which may very well just be a set.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But you may other times when you look at one of those sets and you think that there's no way that can actually happen.
Well, that's the poetic license, isn't it? Of the movie makers, and that's often inspiring. When you have those sets which are just fantastic, because they support the spirit of the movie. They don't have to be realistic, but they have to support the spirit of the movie, right?
Yeah.
And so that's very inspiring. But it's equally good to watch a movie and not to notice the sets in particular, which means that the movie also works because it just draws you into the story, whatever is being displayed, and it doesn't let your architect's mind come and interfere.
Yeah.
So I enjoy both moments. Of course, there are movies where you say, wow, that's a great set, and you even look up who designed it, or in theater as well, even more so because it's more abstract and the means are more restricted on a theater stage, but it's hugely inspiring. The lighting, again, it comes back to that. How so little worlds can be created on a little stage like that. Yeah. And it's believable because it's poetically right. It's not realistic, but
when I look at a movie, I think of it as shots and lighting as well, which is obviously related to what I do. It's very interesting to. I'm quite interested to know what's that like to watch a movie where there is, let's say, a home or an office, which may very well just be a set.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But you may other times when you look at one of those sets and you think that there's no way that can actually happen.
Well, that's the poetic license, isn't it? Of the movie makers, and that's often inspiring. When you have those sets which are just fantastic, because they support the spirit of the movie. They don't have to be realistic, but they have to support the spirit of the movie, right?
Yeah.
And so that's very inspiring. But it's equally good to watch a movie and not to notice the sets in particular, which means that the movie also works because it just draws you into the story, whatever is being displayed, and it doesn't let your architect's mind come and interfere.
Yeah.
So I enjoy both moments. Of course, there are movies where you say, wow, that's a great set, and you even look up who designed it, or in theater as well, even more so because it's more abstract and the means are more restricted on a theater stage, but it's hugely inspiring. The lighting, again, it comes back to that.
Yeah.
How so little worlds can be created on a little stage like that.
Yeah.
And it's believable because it's poetically right. It's not realistic, but yeah.
Where I was going with it was a little different. I was talking about when you look at a set and you know that practically that would not be possible to exist. Let me give you an example. Have you watched Seinfeld?
Yeah.
So
couple of episodes, yeah.
So if you remember, there's a commonly used shot of Seinfeld's kitchen and the front door. And I'm sure we won't end up using this bit, but
doesn't matter.
There's the front door, and then it goes into the kitchen, and then it's sort of at an angle. So it's not a flat wall. So it's one wall, it goes in at an angle, and then there's another wall. So here is where they'll have the refrigerator, and on that side is all the shelves. but on the other side of the front door is supposed to be a perfectly straight hallway.
Right.
And there's no way that can happen.
Right.
Anyway.
No, but it's interesting. We had a client once, still a client today, who came and wanted an interior done for an apartment in the city. And we'd ask him, okay, what do you enjoy? What's your inspiration? Is there anything you can refer to which you think may be relevant for us to know about? And he came with the movie set. He said a particular movie, it had Al Pacino in it, and the apartment of the protagonist, the character Al Pacino was playing, that was his inspiration. And it was an apartment where you could turn around. You were like from the kitchen to the living to the dining, back to the kitchen. And somehow the client enjoyed that. And that was a great help, because then you have an immediate starting point for you to start designing and getting all kinds of wild ideas. Works very well.
Yeah, and it's also great when you have that freedom to do, when you're given one interesting brief and then you have the freedom to go and
then you react to it, and then make it yourself. Yeah.